Hello and thanks for joining me for the first of my opera chats for the 2017-2018 opera season. I've got season tickets this year, so I've got a lot of opera coming up, and I do hope to get chats done after each one. I did see an opera last night, and I wanted to get a chat done on it while it's still really fresh in my mind. What I saw was Aida. I took a selfie. This is me in front of the poster at the Opera House at the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C., where I saw this opera performed by the Washington National Opera. Here is the playbill from the opera. This is a photo from the production that I saw. I'll talk about this more in a bit. This production is a new production co-produced with the San Francisco Opera, the Seattle Opera, as well as the Minnesota Opera. So this is a really good production. I loved it. So so let me just turn to the page here. So Aida, written by Giuseppe Verdi. And the libretto is by Antonio Ghislanzoni, and I'm probably mispronouncing that. Verdi. This was commissioned. Verdi was commissioned to write this opera to sort of inaugurate a new opera house in Cairo in 1871. So this opera premiered in 1871 and then went on to be one of the most performed and beloved operas of the world of all time. Up to now. So let me look at the cast. Let's just talk about that very briefly. I won't go over the whole cast just because of time, but the here it is. Whole cast. Probably can't see that, but there it is. You want to pause it, you can see the whole cast. The conductor was Evan Rogister. The director was Francesca Zambello. Our Aida was Tamara Willson. Our Radamès was Yonghoon Lee. And our Amneris was Ekaterina Semenchuk. And so I looked in the program notes, and so our Aida, our soprano, has sung this role, Aida, at the Metropolitan Opera in New York before. Our Radamès, Yonghoon Lee, our tenor, has sung this role at Opera Australia. And then our Amneris, the mezzo-soprano, has sung her role at the San Francisco Opera previously, as well as the Teatro Real de Madrid. So some really experienced singers in these roles were in this performance that I saw last night. There were some other wonderful singers that make up the cast of this opera that I, just for time, won't go into details on. So what it's about, so let me see if I can do a maybe 3 or 4 minute summary of what this opera is about, this kind of 2.5 hour opera. But about spoilers. So, opera is one of those things sort of like Shakespeare that is not really terribly concerned usually with spoilers. The whole plot is usually in the program. So you see that when you first get there, so you kind of know what's going to happen. But if you're concerned about not wanting to know the outcome of what happens to Aida and what the story of Aida is, then you probably shouldn't finish watching the video, because I'm going to pretty much talk about the whole thing from beginning to end. So the short version of the story. We have Aida. Aida is she's enslaved in Egypt. She's a princess in another place, another country. Seems like it's Ethiopia, but I'm not particularly sure about that. But her mistress is Amneris, who is the daughter of the king of Egypt. And both Aida and Amneris are in love with an officer in the Egyptian army named Radamès. Radamès loves Aida, but the Amneris doesn't know this quite yet. She starts to suspect it, though, and then she eventually tricks Aida into revealing her true feelings for Radamès. Well, Egypt is at war with Aida's country, and so Aida is completely distraught by this because Radamès goes off to fight in this war against her people. And so she's very conflicted by this. Egypt and Radamès ends up being victorious and bringing back a bunch of prisoners from her country, including her father. But no one knows that he's the king, and no one knows that Aida is a princess. So they do know she's from, I guess, from that land, but they didn't know she was, royalty, I guess. Anyway, so the prisoners are all going to be killed, but Radamès sort of pleads on their behalf to save them. And ultimately the priests decide, and the king decides to spare them, but he does keep Aida's father there with them in Egypt. Ultimately, Aida's father comes to learn that she's in love with Radamès, and Radamès is in love with her, and he tells her, hey, Aida, what I need you to do is I need you to find out the troop movements from Radamès. And Aida's like completely conflicted, but then, she remembers her father really sort of lays the guilt on her about the horrible war that they had where her mother died, and the ghost of her mother is going to haunt her if she doesn't help her people. And so, she ends up talking to leading Radamès along, saying, we'll leave, we'll run away, we'll be somewhere where we can be happy. But, by the way, where's the troops? And he tells her. So her father overhears. Well, he understands then that he's now betrayed his people. And this is eventually uncovered. He is put on trial. Amneris leaves his fate to priests, sort of out of a jealous rage that she goes in, and ultimately they decide to bury him alive in a tomb beneath the idol, the god, and Aida and her father had made this escape, but then unbeknownst to Radamès, she had come back anticipating what was going to happen, and she hid herself in the tomb, so when the tomb is sealed with him in it, she is there as well. And the opera ends with Aida dies in Radamès' arms, and then we hear Amneris singing a song of mourning, because she's, of course, still loves Radamès as well, off in the distance. So, yeah, that's the short version of the opera. It's very beautiful. There's some very famous. I guess the most famous scene and perhaps the most recognizable music is this triumphal scene when Radamès comes back victorious from fighting with Aida's people. There's this triumphal sort of scene, triumphal march, and that was awesome. That's very recognizable. Another thing about the music, if you haven't seen Aida and you haven't heard the music, I bet some of it would probably still be recognizable to you just because it's become sort of ingrained in our culture, and that march is one of them that you probably have heard at some point and might be recognizable to you. And the other thing is, I think, I don't know this for sure academically, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say this is what I think, is that this opera colors how we hear Egypt, how we hear ancient Egypt to this day, because some of the music from it sounds like music that you hear associated with movies about ancient Egypt, like, for example, the Ten Commandments, or another one that I thought of was Cleopatra, the Elizabeth Taylor, Richard Burton version. So, when we hear or when we see movies that take place in ancient Egypt, we have this certain idea of what it sounds like. I know that sounds odd, but just because soundtracks of the movies sort of color our impressions of what it should sound like there. And I think that comes from Aida, because the songs to the goddess, the songs to the god Ta, that are sung there by the high priestess, it just sounds real familiar to what we think of as ancient Egypt sounding like. So I hope that made sense. So a note about the production. So I mentioned this here. This is done. This artwork is done by. Let's see. I have. It's written here. It's in the program who the artist was. I think I can find it. Well, Maybe I can't. Oh, Retina, it's called. There it is. This is the artist Retina. So I took a photo of this artwork. He has some artwork on display at the Kennedy Center, and I took a photo of it just so you could see some of it in a little more colorful way. This red was used in the production. This production felt really contemporary. It almost felt futuristic. It almost felt a little science fiction-y because this evokes writing, but it doesn't match any writing that we know for sure. Like, it's not Egyptian, obviously, and it's not Asian. So sometimes this production felt really modern, contemporary Africa, and then sometimes it felt really East Asian, and then sometimes it felt like 1950s South America, like Perón. Juan Perón, and then sometimes it felt like early 60s United States, like Kennedy era. But all that together really felt different. It felt, yes, they were singing about Egypt and the Egypt mythology is mentioned and this type of thing, but it really felt outside of the ancient Egypt that we know, almost like, an alternative, futuristic ancient Egypt, if that makes sense. So, I thought that was pretty cool. And then the other kind of cool thing about this whole dynamic with Amneris, Aida, and Radamès, I think that the opera, just so beautifully, maybe why it resonates so well with people is because these people, they're flawed. Aida doesn't want to cause the death of Radamès, obviously, but she's conflicted. And so in this moment of conflict, she actually wants to help her people, and so she gets him to tell that information. And likewise, Amneris, she loves Radamès, but in sort of this moment of jealousy, she does something that she can't take back, and that is like hand over the sentence of Radamès to the priests. And then Radamès, same way, like he wants to go away with Aida, he wants to run away with her, so he doesn't think about giving away the troop positions, until it's too late in this moment of, so we're all imperfect people, and we all are inconsistent and have inconsistencies. And, this opera really shows that, and really shows, that sometimes that can have really tragic consequences. But then at the end of it all, they all still loved each other. Well, Radamès loved Aida. He liked Amneris, but he was not in love with her. But even Radamès going to his grave, Amneris still loves him. Aida still loves him, even though she ultimately did cause his death, by getting him to betray his people. Unwittingly, but still, he could have recanted his love for her and saved himself at one point. All he had to do was renounce her and agree to marry Amneris, but he didn't want to do that because he loved Aida. So, that's just the nature of, that's just human nature, and sometimes that's what opera can just sing to us and put into such a great context. So. All right, well, I am going to leave it at that. I think my next opera coming up is October 7th. I think it's October 7th. It's in October anyway, and it is Samson and Delilah. So that will be coming up in October. So stay tuned for that. Until then, take care. Bye.